Let me preface this video by saying that when I was getting ready to film, everything was quiet. And then suddenly, every single dog on the block started barking, so I apologize if you can hear that. Anyways, I'm Roxy, and this is Wreck Me BS. Today I bring you my January wrap up. I'm very excited because one of my channel goals this year is to make a wrap up video every single month. I don't tend to follow through on my channel goals because right at the end of the first semester I start to forget that I ever had a booktube channel, but I'm rooting for myself, and so I hope you are too. These sort of videos are my favorite ones to watch as a booktuber audience and to make as a booktuber. So I hope you enjoy them as well. Let's begin. Two of these books I believe I finished in the first days of February, but I'm filming this now, and so I was dragging my books here, and then I remember that the first book I need to talk to you about is actually not here because I had to give it back to the library, but that is Jane Austen, Alive by Claire Tomalin. This is a very concise biography of Jane Austen. It's like 200 something pages, so really short, but it's actually very comprehensive and draws a lot of lines that are very reasonable between Jane Austen's work and her life. Not in the sense that, oh, this is a mirror of her life, which, sometimes you can make those arguments with any author, but most of it is simply not true. But how her situation actually influenced her work in ways that are very plausible, and she backs that up with letters and diaries, and it's just so fascinating. What I will say though, it's a bit confusing because in Regency era, apparently everyone was named basically the same. So there are so many Janes, so many Cassandras, so many Fannys, so many Henrys. It's very confusing, and Claire does apply a family tree, but there were also some Henrys and Janes that aren't family or aren't in the tree that you were like, who is this person? And you get this feeling a bit of, why am I even reading about this person? So I think the scope sometimes widens a bit too much, but don't let that deter you from continuing on with the book, because as a whole the book is very complete. I really, really enjoyed it, and I really recommend it. And it's also really well written. So there you go. The next book I want to talk to you about is actually one I'm very proud of having read, and I'm also very happy because it's part of my reading goals, so I'm always pleased about that, and that is The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton. So I'll just read you this part because it's really, really concise, and then I'll give you my impressions. So it is 1866, and Walter Moody has come to make his fortune upon the New Zealand goldfields. On the night of his arrival, he stumbles across a tense gathering of 12 local men who have met in secret to discuss a series of unsolved crimes. A wealthy man has vanished, a whore has tried to end her life, and an enormous fortune has been discovered in the home of a luckless drunk. So that is the basis of a plot that is really not more than the resolution of that, but that goes into the backstory of each individual character in a way that's masterful and graceful, and really gets the best out of traditional Victorian novels that were written in actual Victorian period, and takes all that and puts it in a New Zealand setting, and it feels both fresh and both like you're actually reading a Victorian novel. And I don't know how Eleanor Catton does it, but it works. It has an astrological metaphor going that it's really, you don't necessarily need it, but it's so fun to figure out. It has a map, it has a list of characters, and at the beginning of each chapter, it has like the astrological wheel. Like the first half, I was Googling everything just because I wanted to see if it worked, and it did. So there you go. I don't know how she did it. I read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and this was a buddy read, so I was very happy about that. I adore this book. It's everything they promised it would be. It's a first-person narrative of a young girl who works as a maid for a very grumpy older woman. She meets this older man who she falls in love with, and he proposes in a very rude manner, and she says yes, partly because she loves him, also partly because subconsciously she feels this will be her ticket out, an opportunity to have a more interesting life. And so she goes with him to his house, which is actually a mansion because he's from an old aristocratic family. And then it turns out the housekeeper is obsessed with her master's former wife, Rebecca. That's Rebecca. Rebecca is painted in this light. She's this marvelous, elegant woman who apparently everyone was in love with. And so this very young protagonist that is easily impressed doesn't really know what to do with this memory that seems like it looms almost physically in this place. The prose is really, really good. It's still after the facts occur. That's not a spoiler. It's on the first chapters. But she talks with a lot of perspective about things that she did when she was younger. And so I really appreciate that. Here we find the first person narrator being really honest about what happened and about her foolishness, but also with enough distance to show us that she has actually learned something and that she's not the same person. And the twist is great. The next book is Less by Andrew Sean Greer. And before I start gushing about this, I'm going to tell you what it is about. I'm sorry, the seal is kind of shining. This is about Arthur Less, a 50-year-old, almost 50-year-old, middling writer who was once the younger lover of a poet that was very well known and was one of the big names of the Russian River School, very important literary movement. He's scheduling a pilgrimage of the world of sorts because he has just received an invitation saying that his sort of boyfriend for 9 years, who he never actually asked to be his boyfriend, is getting married. He plans this whole thing in order to escape that wedding and also in order to not be alone when he turns 50. And this is this sort of book that gets right what every book that is described as poignant, funny, but tragic at the same time gets wrong. It's just, the prose is magnificent, it's genuinely funny. Like, I laughed out loud several times when reading this. And it's just so earnest. It's like chatting with a person, although this is not narrating first person really, but it's just life itself. It's a book that I would have loved to have written because it's just so great. One of my favorite books of the year, I can predict that now. And if I don't read anything better than this, which would be kind of sad, but also really possible because there are no words for how much I love this book. Then this I finished in February, A Series of Unfortunate Events, The End. I've been reading this series for, I don't know, a couple of years. The first 4 I read really quickly, and then because it got kind of repetitive, I let it breathe. In case you don't know this, there is a show on Netflix which is really good. It's really a lot like the books, so you could technically just watch that, but I don't recommend it because the writing style of Daniel Handler, aka Lemony Snicket here, is so funny and so educational at the same time. It's full of literary and historical references. I really, really recommend it. And it's also just plain funny. The whole series is about 3 orphans whose house burns down, and they go to a series of very inadequate caretakers. That's the bones of it. But they are caught in the middle of a mystery that involves their late parents. And the first 5 books, you don't really discover much. It's much more about just the same formula over and over. But after that one, you start really picking at the meats of the story and you start getting into the mystery, and it's so good. What is very interesting about this series is that it deals with moral ambiguity and great areas and what does it mean to be a good person. And I think not a lot of series do that in a way that is not preachy. So read it. If you haven't yet, you've missed out on the best middle grade series of all. Then I have Hellenism and Homosexuality in Victorian Oxford by Linda Dowling. This is a very short seminal work in homosocial and homoerotic studies. It tackles the influence of Greek ideals in Oxford and how they operated a sort of homosexual code and how those identities were negotiated within other Victorian thought currents. And it's very interesting, but it's also very, very dry. This is that essay in your college curriculum that you know you're learning a lot by reading it, but it's also so filled with references and quotes and that really dense language that I don't think is necessary, especially now having read so many different academic books. I don't necessarily think this should be the norm. Luckily, it's short and it has those moments where I cannot put it down, but all in all, not my favorite. Now let's move on to what I'm currently reading. 3 books that I'm actually dipping in and out of, although I guess that if I have lots of books going, I'm dipping in and out of all of them, but these ones especially, they are for that. And this is Odin, the Everyman Library Pocket Poetry. I bought this for 1 poem, and I have realized I love Odin more than I thought. I mean, I've always liked him as a poet and as a scholar, but now that I'm reading more of his poetry, I really feel he speaks to me. I really recommend him. I think he's an easy to read author because he does have some references in there, but for a lot of his poems, I don't think you even need to know the reference to enjoy the poems, but also that the references aren't that obscure. So I don't know, I just really like Odin, so check it out. And I'm dipping in and out of The Best American Science and Nature Writing by Mary Roach. The problem is that I was sort of detained by one Jonathan Franzen essay that I really thought was very, very boring. He wrote here an essay about illegal bird hunting. Some parts of it were very exciting and some parts of it sucked. And I'm not trashing on Jonathan Franzen as a whole because I've read some of his speeches and they have been great, and some of his other essays and they have also been great, and I loved Freedom, the novel, and I also love Freedom in general. But anyways, I don't know why this one that was supposed to be among the best was so boring, but it kind of put me off the book for a bit. Then I have The ABC of Opera, Everything There Is to Know by Eckhart van der Hoogen. Here's the thing. I hadn't realized that this is a literal ABC of opera. And I know it's on the title, but I thought that was a figure of speech that was like everything there is to know about opera, a history of opera. So there is like a 10-page introduction with some opera history, and then there is like a 30-40-page glossary at the end with terms. But the big of the book is literally an alphabetized list of all the operas, or I don't know if all the operas, but like the most important operas. It's kind of fun to read if you can dip in and out of it. You read a couple every day or so, but it's not compelling to read like a whole book because eventually they will start blending together. So you sort of need that temporal division. And so I don't know if I'll finish this before I have to give it back to the library, but if not, then I'll check it out again another time. Dolce Vita Confidential by Sean Levi. And the subtitle is Fellini, Laurent Pucci, Paparazzi, and the Swinging High Life of the 1950s Rome. This is very entertaining, especially because it's sort of gossip of a former, more glamorous time, but close enough to my timeline that I recognize most of the names, and they mention actresses and actors that I like, and designers that I know, and singers that I know. So I think that is actually very interesting. It's a very good reading experience. As a whole, the narrative is not super compelling. Like, I don't feel this is telling me a whole story. It actually feels very all over the place. I sort of feel this was a missed opportunity, but I'm still enjoying it a lot, and so you'll probably see it on the February wrap-up. I'm also reading Between Women, Friendship, Desire, and Marriage in Victorian England by Sharon Marcus. This was on my December nonfiction TBR. This is also very academic, but in a way that I feel is much more dynamic. Then Linda Dowling's book, I'm Sorry, Linda. And then finally, a book that I literally only read the introduction of, but I sort of want to confess here that it's a book that I actually bought this year. And you shouldn't be reading it, but I love it. Is Apollo's Angels, A History of Ballet by Jennifer Homans. Yeah, so I bought this on a whim. If I read this right now, it's going to count towards my big book challenge because it is a very large book. Then at least I will be breaking the rules, but I will be working in a challenge. Other than that, if you want to know what I will be reading during February, you can check out my Bookstagram. I do 3 book TBRs. I upload them as stories, and then I have them as highlighted stories. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe, comment and tell me what do you think of these books? Have you read them? Do you want to read them? And also, what have you been reading? See you next time. I just want to say that I've been filming for a long time, but it's only because I've made so many mistakes. I was so inspiredly talking about this book to you, and then my dad came in. It was so funny, but not when you think like I have 40 minutes of footage and 10 minutes of video. The problem is that for a book that's kind of short, it's kind of heavy. Pages are very like thick, good quality, which, you know, it's good. It means like it's a high production book. But that also means that carrying it is a bit of a hassle.